Yo, what up, guys? This is Dennis Calvero, your host of Narrative. Before we begin, I want you to be aware that this episode was recorded before the start of the outbreak. While being mindful of the current pandemic, we also want to provide you with some distraction that's entertaining, educational, and inspiring. We thank you for listening. Be safe and be kind. Peace. Peace and welcome to Narrative, where we bring you real talk with real people. I'm your host, Dennis Calvero, along with my co-host, Keith Chan. For weekly updates and exclusive content, follow us on Instagram at narrative.today. You can also go on our website, www.narrative.today. Let's start the conversation. This is Narrative. What up, Keith?
D, what's good, bro?
What we got coming today?
Man, I'm super excited. This is actually a personal friend of mine.
Right.
For the last few years, I met Jamie originally when he was still with FARFETCH.
Okay.
So he was one of the first employees in the U.S. and he built them to what they are now, which is huge.
Yeah, FARFETCH is huge.
Yeah, and then he was ready to kind of step away for a couple of years. He took a kind of a sabbatical,
Right.
just to kind of take a look at himself, take care of his fam.
Yeah.
The
We all
interest-
need that little reset. you know?
Yeah, for sure. And just me knowing Jamie personally for a long time, he has like a crazy amount of love for old school hip hop music.
Yeah, him and I both.
Yeah, for sure. So it was always anytime I saw him, we always had a good time. We talked about music, and he was always like, man, if I can find a new project that has anything to do with like the music I love, I'll jump right at it.
Right.
And recently he reached out to me. He was like, yo, that project just kind of fell into my lap. So he has a new project that he's working on, and it really melds his experiences with fashion,
Right.
plus his personal love for classic hip hop music. So I was like, man, it would be great if you can come in and talk with me and my homie D. And it turns out that his older brother, Ray, is actually one of your good friends from high school.
Yeah, I didn't know Jamie as much as I do Ray and his older cousin Deco. But yeah, Ray and I were good friends in high school. It was my first time being in a private school, and we had that kind of real interaction, and we became pretty close in the 2 years I was there, especially through music and hip hop culture.
Yeah, word. So I'm excited to bring him in. So here's Jamie Naguiat.
Yes. Okay, Jamie, what's up?
How's it going?
Been a minute.
It's been a long time.
A couple decades.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Welcome to Narrative today. Got Jamie Naguiat. We got some history because your brother and I he probably was my best friend in high school. I had never been to a private Catholic school until Bosco, so it was a bit of a culture shock for me. And me and Ray, we got along well, especially, we both had that passion for music and hip hop in general. But I don't think you and I have never really had a full conversation.
No, probably not, because I'm 40 now, and I actually I was closer in age to your brother.
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
I would dance with those guys, or
Yeah.
aspired to dance
Yeah.
with those guys when I was younger.
Right. So you guys grew up in Cerritos, right?
We did, yeah.
Okay.
We were from Cerritos.
Just get the mic a little bit closer.
Sure.
Yeah.
So we grew up in Cerritos, but probably for my high school years, we lived in Norwalk. So just
Okay.
adjacent.
Yeah, it's still
Yeah.
part of Cerritos.
And now my parents, my brother, they're in La Palma.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay,
so
cool.
really close by to Cerritos still.
Cool. Yeah, so growing up in Cerritos is like, it was a melting pot of different Asians, primarily Filipino, and we had neighboring Latin neighborhoods
Yeah.
around us, and it seemed like there was a really, big community in music for Cerritos with a lot of DJs. There was the graffiti scene was starting to blow up, and how did that affect your life now, or from what you saw growing up in Cerritos?
Yeah, definitely, because I have different generations of cousins that we all sort of grew up in Cerritos.
Right.
So from my older cousins who
Deco's your cousin, right?
Deco's my cousin too.
Okay,
yeah. So we all went to the same elementary school, St. Linus, out in Norwalk.
Right.
And a lot of that, it's interesting when I chat with my parents about it. It's like, well, why did we go there? It's like, well, because all of your cousins went there. I was like, well, it's a pretty shitty school, in a bad neighborhood.
Yeah.
But they're like, all our aunts were going there. They all immigrated from Minnesota around the same time.
Oh, wow.
And so, growing up, I was always sort of exposed to different aspects of culture,
Yeah.
and specifically with hip hop culture. So I would go as a kid and see my older cousin who's like 52 breaking, you know what I
Right.
mean? There'd be the
Right.
cardboard boxes, and then there'd be DJs. So I was always sort of exposed to that type of culture.
Yeah. We did all that.
Yeah.
We had our cardboard, or if you had a little bit of money, you had a roll of linoleum. And you were able to get your windmills more crispy.
Yeah, totally. And I was never that great of a break dancer. A little bit of popping and locking.
Yeah, me too.
I sort of grew up more in the house, house dancing type of.
Yeah, so that's where like when we had the Boogie Unit and Tribe and hip hop and dance really had a strong impact amongst our friends, and just even the unity of Filipinos that were into dancing and the house culture. For those that don't know, you want to expand a little bit about what house was?
Well, you probably could do a better job, but essentially it was this interesting time in music, like hip hop music, where there are rayon shirts and Cavaricis, and people were sort of like, whether it's Heavy D and the Boys or a lot of people sort of dancing to that style,
right.
which was more upbeat.
Yeah.
And it was more, standing and doing moves, if you will.
Yeah.
But the beats per minute were quite fast, so it was sort of a form of dancing at the time.
Right.
It's closer to what you would say EDM and house music is now.
That's a lot faster, but it was sort of like, it was still part of the genre, but I would say it was like not huge.
Yeah, because what had happened was when hip hop, especially when the native tongues were starting to emerge with De La, Jungle Brothers. Jungle Brothers were heavily influenced by house music out of Chicago. So they had that constant upbeat, like steady sound. And what was happening with the dance culture in New York is they were dancing to those rhythms. And house had its form of dance interpretation. I guess now it would be evolved more into like voguing, but the hip hop community it took that in like this more freestyle kind of dance form. And there was also this heavy, would you say like a Afrocentric culture. That's why we were wearing those
apartheid, cross colors, all of those things.
Yeah, the medallions, the red, black, and green, and so I think even with us, there was a strong fashion sense to hip hop and the lifestyle that we were all attracted to.
Yeah, I mean, if you're saying that now, I know that house came from like Chicago, even Detroit to some extent.
Yeah.
And that came more through like the disco kind of vibe, and that's what morphed into what the house scene was. And then when you had hip hop that was happening on the East Coast, came from more like a funk and soul kind of place.
Yeah.
But at some point they merged together, and that's kind of, I think, the period that you guys are talking about.
Right.
What's interesting to me is that, being from Texas, we also kind of had our own evolution of what hip hop was when, I grew up b-boying and then DJing, and then the music we were listening to is more like freestyle, or we call it like Latin hip hop. And I think that came more from the house side versus the hip hop side. But why do you think it is that, me being from where I was and you guys are from California, how did we still grow up and look towards like the same, we still follow the same, trends.
Right.
We still looked up to the same thing. Why do you think it is that, that we just kind of get drawn to that?
Yeah, Jamie, what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting because when I think about like culture nowadays, and I was just in the Philippines for like 3 weeks. It's in a way I feel guilty because I don't necessarily identify with that culture. Like I identify with hip hop culture, and when you think about the correlation of that, it's typically it appeals to people who come from poorer areas. There's a sense of sort of like it's not mainstream Caucasian. So
Yeah.
I think there's that element of, being a minority. And I think also the things that that's talked about within the music itself, it's sort of like you can relate to what people are saying and the storytelling that they're doing because in a way it appeals to your situation, right? So
Yeah.
when you think about it and you take away it doesn't really matter where you are. You can be in London, you can be, here, you can be in Texas. And I think a lot of people sort of can identify with growing up, having hard choices.
With that struggle.
Yeah, exactly.
I think early hip hop definitely had that voice of the hood or whatever struggle it was, and it being such a subculture, it attracted the people that weren't as what's the word I'm looking for, like privileged.
Yeah.
So I think now it's easy to get culture from your phone but back then there weren't a lot of outlets for it.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those where it felt like this belongs to us. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
And
feel
when
like
you
hit
think
that.
about like our heroes, whether, say for me, obviously growing up in LA as well, like we idolize athletes, we idolize rappers,
Yeah.
that was sort of the aspirational get money quick and all your problems are over.
Yeah.
And so, now you could have like a white collar job, or there's different ways, be an entrepreneur, start a business, start a clothing line.
Yeah.
And so there's more opportunities out there because, we live in a more connected culture.
Yeah.
But growing up, you just aspired to be, I wouldn't necessarily say like, corners and stuff like that, like trying to work
Yeah.
the corner type things, but it's sort of like we can all rap about baseball cards or basketball cards, and it's like everybody wanted to be Jordan or
Yeah.
Magic or Bird,
Yeah.
or people wanted to, people could relate to, whether it's the Beastie Boys or all of those old school hip hop. Because I don't know, it's kind of interesting because when, throughout the years, a lot of people are like, where are you from? Cerritos, and they know it, It's
Yeah.
like, whether they know it for dancing, whether they know it for DJing is pretty much the main two of like the four elements, if you will.
And then if you really didn't know that, you know about the auto center where you could buy cars or
So who are some of the people
malls.
that came from Cerritos? Like
The Beat Junkies.
Yeah, the Beat Junkies were some of the they were sort of like the DJ crew that kind of, when DJ battling was already like a global thing, but prior to that there was really good crews like Public Image, Unique Technique, and these guys would go to like Filipinos would rent out these halls and hotels and have like these dances, and then they would have these DJ battles from DJs from Carson, like Icy Ice and them, and then these other DJs like Westward One. There was like these pretty epic battles of DJing, and also like the graffiti culture with NASA Crew and Rich One, who was the co-founder of Creative Recreation Footwear. Cerritos has its share of actors and actresses as well, like Morris Chestnut, guy on Boys in the Hood. He's one. I think Chad Allen. He went to Bosco with me.
He went to Bosco. Yeah.
There's quite a few, and one thing in the news that really kind of put Cerritos, I don't want to say on the map. It was notoriously, but we had that plane crash back in the 80s, where Aeromexico collided into a smaller, like a commuter plane, and it crashed into this neighborhood and killed everyone on the plane, and then a couple of people that were living in the house. So we have this it's a post office that's kind of like a memorial to that crash. And you went to Bosco, right?
Yeah, I went to Bosco.
Yeah, so I went to Bosco for 2 years. That's where me and your brother met. Bosco seems to be in the news a lot for its sports.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. Back when I went there, I would probably say, I don't know if the sort of demographics are the same, but I would still say it was predominantly Mexican.
Yeah.
And then, you had Asians, and as a subset of that, you had Filipinos, and then, you had Caucasians and black folks.
Yeah.
But essentially, it was a big melting pot. And I asked, I was chatting with people about why there's a rival school, Servite, one of the rival schools, and I was like, people, depending on where you grew up, like if you were OC, you probably went to Servite.
Yeah, or Mater Dei.
Or Mater Dei.
Right.
But that's a lot more expensive than, what Bosco was.
Yeah.
So you sort of had, I went to St. Linus in Norwalk, was a Catholic school. And then it was sort of a natural progression, but it more tied to all of my cousins already went to Bosco already.
Yeah, because Deco was there.
Deco was there, his older brother,
Right.
My brother was there, I went there. And then all of the girls went to our sister school, St. Joseph's.
Yeah, that's where my wife went. My wife's Jonette Ureta.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so she went to St. Joseph's. Her older sister, Wilma, went there. Wilma used to date Deco, I think. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a small world. But now Bosco's known for mainly one is their football team.
Yeah, when did they become like the powerhouse? So they weren't that way when you guys went there. Like it wasn't talked about.
We had when I was going there, it was just a regular football team, nothing special. Just local people. We actually had some really good basketball players when I was there. Yeah. So Shea Cotton. Jelani Gardner. So these guys were, high potential basketball players who
Shea Cotton
really
could have been like the next LeBron, right?
Yeah, he was supposed to have a documentary about him.
Yeah, my some friends of mine did the documentary.
Okay.
And I should be, I want to say it's going to be picked up soon, but yeah, check that one out. That's a real interesting story of someone that could have really made it. And
so he was my classmate, essentially.
Okay.
So we had a bunch of classes together. He was a super cool guy, and at his, I think it was like when we were freshmen, 6'4".
Did he stay in Bosco, or did he transfer
No, he went to Mater Dei.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Okay. Yeah, because I remember back then, Mater Dei was kind of known more for having an elite sports program. I mean, they still do, and they kind of are Bosco's rivals now.
Yeah.
I think they're the ones who ended up in the championships this season.
Yeah, I mean, Bosco's number 1, Mater Dei is number 2.
Right.
National rank.
Yeah. And their quarterback, this I believe is he Samoan? DJ?
I think he's Samoan.
I don't want to mess up his
I don't know either, because I haven't really kept up, but it's kind of an interesting thing going back to sort of, there's like it wasn't, I would say, necessarily the best school in terms of academics, but there is something about going to an all-boys school and that sort of discipline that they instill. So academically, I didn't think it was a very great school, but they taught you how to be, like, I guess in this situation, men in a way.
Right.
It's like, they were strict, they were tough, and so you did sort of grow up in that environment where, when I would look at some of my friends, it was kind of one of those things where when they were going to public school, it's like different routes you could go, you could be a gangster.
One thing is that you could have a mustache in a public school. At Bosco, you couldn't. You had to shave, you had to wear a collared shirt.
No black, no Raiders
You had to tuck in your shirts.
So I guess I have a question with that, would be in the context of today's world, how do you see like a school like Bosco do they still have a place in today's context? You know, with a lot of kind of things are evolving and rules are changing and hopefully more progressive, you know what I mean? But then now you have kind of this old world, all boys or even all girls type situation. How do you see that sitting in kind of today's context?
Wow, it's a big question because I think it just depends on sort of your own philosophy. Yeah. And like, for example, I have a different philosophy than my wife does, right? Because she grew up in a similar situation going to Catholic schools and all-girls school. And so she has a preference because it was sort of put to her that if she went to a different school, then her life may have gone a different path. So when we think about our kids, she's very pro, you know, private school. It helped me. You get more attention. The ratio's better with teachers. But, you know, I just have a different perspective because just in general, at least when I think about at the college level and when I think about my kids who are 4 and 2 and they're going to start college, I don't think it's going to be as relevant in terms of established institutions and education. So that's a whole different, you know, ball game. But when I think about Bosco, like I respect it because of the friendships that I made. Yeah. I thought it was a shitty school academically. Nowadays, they're very good. I think there was some rumor about, you know, somebody won the lottery and gave them a bunch of money because now they recruit folks. Back then, it was just like whoever joined the football team, but now they go out to Carson, they go to Long Beach.
I mean, these kids are coming in to Bosco.
Like 6'3" and like...
They're going to Bosco because they know they're going to get the spotlight.
And I think DJ is even from the IE somewhere. And, you know, going all the way to Bellflower to go to school. Yeah, it's definitely, you get that spotlight.
Yeah, and not to go down this like dark path, but also while I was there, you know, we had instances of 3 different priests that were, you know, taking advantage as sometimes Boy Scout leaders or their position as coaches of, you know, and it was kind of a really shocking thing because it's not so much just Bosco, but it's sort of the institutionalized Catholic thing, and they just move them around. You know what I mean? So if somebody gets busted, they'll just ship them around, and it's sort of like sweeping it under the rug. So just the sort of hypocrisy behind that has always, you know, doesn't sit well with almost everybody, I would say.
Yeah. I think there was, you can quote me if I'm wrong, but I think they eventually had to pay out some students.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I even had a classmate my year who was always a little bit off, and it came out later because they sent us all letters. You know, I remember coming home from college and my dad sitting me down and just asking me if anything happened and if I was okay, and you know, during that period, and I was like, yo, chill out with that, but I understand and I appreciate you asking me and sitting me down. Yeah. But it's pretty shitty what happened to those individuals and the whole thing in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the whole Catholic institution always has that, you know.
I mean, that's always going to be like the dark spot.
A stigma about him, So after high school, you went on to college, obviously. And
I went on,
You want to?
So I guess going back a little bit, so my whole Bosco experience, it was sort of like there was this path that my brother helped guide me through. It's like you can go down the rough path with your friends that are going to Cerritos High and, you know, are sort of like gangsters, or, you know, you can go the DJ route. And so, you know, I liked dancing at the time. I liked music, and, you know, it was sort of, hip-hop was something that I could gravitate towards that would allow me or provided me the opportunity to get out of the element of being exposed to sort of the dark side of gangs and just getting into drugs and stuff like that. So that was sort of the path that I chose, and started DJing probably when I was in 8th grade. And then that sort of continued on, and I was also like a skater as well. And back then I was like with Aftermath Productions, which is just one of the many DJ groups that were from Cerritos. Okay. And so, you know, I was doing, whether they'd be house parties, some clubs here and there, school dances and stuff like that. So
Right.
I put a lot of my energy into music. And it was kind of funny because everybody would work at this marketing research place where you would essentially be cold calling people called merits. So a bunch of people would work there because they paid well, like they paid above like minimum wage. So I got a job there, and it was conducting surveys for like Toyota and the Lotto, and it was really boring.
Yeah.
But I only did it so it got to that point where I had enough to buy 1200s. And so once that I got that paycheck to buy 1200s, and I was buying them from a buddy, it's like I just straight quit. And it's like, oh, cool.
I got the tools.
Yeah, I got the tools, and then, just started DJing, and I grew up in the era where I wanted to be a battle DJ, because you got the party DJs, but then you got people winning DMC and stuff like that.
Right.
And then as I started to do that, I was doing it for several years, and then came time for sort of like, where am I going to go to college?
Yeah.
And so I was fortunate enough to be accepted to Berkeley, where my brother went.
Okay.
And essentially, I went there after high school. And it was kind of an interesting thing because, none of my friends went there. So there's, I think, 3 or 4 of us that went from my high school. And then one was like this white dude who was super smart. Me, semi-smart, like I had good grades, but I think I had a good story.
Yeah.
And then I had another buddy of mine who was like, he was more of a walk-on to the basketball team. So he was smart and he was an athlete.
Yeah.
And, so I ended up going to school out there, and it was an amazing experience.
Berkeley's Cal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just listened to something with Tony Gonzalez, and I know that he went to Cal because he wanted to play basketball, but he was good in both. And he had, obviously, his career. But yeah, he's like, I really wanted to be, my passion was in basketball. And I went there because of Jason Kidd.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a funny story, though, because, my brother, they were, I think they were the same year. And so they were at the same, I believe, the Clark Kerr campus at Berkeley.
Oh, wow.
Is like this dormitory. But,
Yeah.
my brother then, still like a little bit of a tough guy, and like he was still in his skater mode, so he had these long bangs and purple hair and shit.
Yeah.
And Tony Gonzalez totally sweated him because my brother tried to act tough and stuff. And my brother's like, I don't want any part of that. Yeah. They also, because of his size, they got him to try and walk onto the football team, but he couldn't make it through one practice because it was just too intense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Cal was a dope experience.
Yeah, and then you got to get a sense of the Bay culture, right? Being up north.
Yeah. So
and I think that California being so big, I think there is a difference in LA and the Bay.
Yeah.
Right?
Huge difference. Being from LA, I didn't necessarily like the culture there, but they're very, they're very into their scene, right? So Too Short, E40, they're super hardcore. Even their style of hip hop
very
is
local.
Very local, very different. But you can go to different places, great vibe, so there's a lot of influences there, and then it goes into the sports rivalry, and it's an interesting thing because I do not like San Francisco or the Bay Area fans in general. And it's because of my experience when I lived there. They would just always hate on LA teams.
Yeah.
And, and we would be like, wow, you guys are really way behind in the way you dress. And you guys are like, a little bit, not as cool as LA. And maybe that fueled them to be more like, we're going to represent our area.
Yeah, have their own identity. Yeah.
I feel the same way. There's like a handful of cities in the U.S. where I feel they had that same mindset. SF being one, for sure.
Yeah.
The other one would be Houston.
Yeah.
And then New Orleans.
Yeah.
Which means, to me, it's like these are 3 cities that really had a strong grassroots like music scene. The Bay, you had the hyphy stuff. Houston, you had the screwed up thing.
Yeah.
New Orleans, you had the Cash Money movement.
Yeah.
And then once you have such a strong movement at any point, then you almost can never go away from it. Because, if you're in Houston and you came up in this screwed up period, right? And then now you have like a younger kid or whatever, and they try to do something new. You're like, no, you gotta go back to
true.
where it came from.
Yeah.
And then you never break that cycle.
Right.
But then you have a city like LA, which is the ultimate melting pot of new things happening all the time. I mean, things are moving faster in LA than anywhere else in the country, you can probably
Agreed.
say. So because of that, you're always going to see it from that outside looking in when you look at the Bay.
Yeah.
But now if you grew up in the Bay and you look out, you're always going to be like, we super deep rooted
Yeah.
in this one thing.
True.
We hyphy.
Yeah, because the crazy thing is,
Too bad your Niners lost.
yeah. But it's like you get hyphy artists in the Bay who will never leave their city
Yeah.
and will be like a local legend.
Yeah.
Same with Houston, same with New Orleans.
Yeah.
And they don't need to get radio play anywhere else. They're huge in their city.
And it's crazy to even see other rappers that kind of take some of that influence and not say their whole style, but like Drake will have a song in the Bay with, with what was the one with
Mac Dre.
Yeah.
Or you had like DJ Mustard.
Yeah.
His whole sound is a Bay Area sound. you
Yeah.
know?
And then some dudes will do something from New Orleans or,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's you're right. Those areas really have like a true local owned identity.
Yeah.
And where New York and LA is kind of, more vast and takes from all more popular
Yeah,
stuff.
it's just more open
Yeah.
to receiving new things because that's what their culture is. Their culture is building on what was there and kind of expanding on, and then you get so many different people that they're always going to have different points of view, and that's the great thing about a city like LA or New York.
Well, what are your views on music today?
It's a great question. I sort of feel like, I sort of grew up when I started DJing, so maybe that probably like early 90s to about mid 2000, I was
Yeah.
really into hip hop.
Right.
And so, people call that the golden era. It depends on who you ask.
Right.
And then sort of past that, like I never got on the wavelength of when things were, besides sort of Outkast,
Yeah.
when it went towards, Cash Money and all of that, I was already sort of out. Like,
Yeah, all the bling and the hustlers.
yeah,
and
yeah. So I was just sort of, I think I'm an interesting case because I love hip hop, but then I sort of went cold turkey and really didn't necessarily go into any music in general. It's like nowadays I listen to a bunch of podcasts.
Yeah.
I listen to a bunch of books on audio, and now, or audiobooks, and now, when I'm in my car, I'm able to use things like choose a channel that has 90s hip hop, or you can pick particular artists. So I'm more of the old guy now that has nostalgia.
Yeah.
That's like, I'm stuck in this era, mumble rap, not really sure what that is. And so when I think about like the era that I enjoy, that era of sort of early 90s to mid 2000. And then there's, I think, people today that sort of reflect that.
Yeah.
And obviously the music in general has sort of been influenced by all of these things leading up to what these guys do today.
Yeah.
But it's kind of interesting when some of the new guys today don't know sort of the old school guys, right?
Yeah.
They don't know who they are just because they're young.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think it's really evolved. So when I think about music today, to be honest, I'm still stuck in a time
and
capsule.
It's weird because I heard that debate over young guys. There's like some of the new guys that don't care about the past. They don't care at all of what hip hop started from and who was in the golden era. And then there are some that are purists and they know like Illmatic bars, from Nas.
Yeah.
But it's some of the things that kind of threw me off is that some of the guys that were making noise now is like I couldn't really even tell geographically where they're from. I would already assume that if I heard something that was on a trap beat that they were from the South,
Right.
or from Atlanta, and then
But now you got those kids that they're doing that, but they're from LA.
yeah, or New York,
or from
like,
London.
Yeah, like I didn't know.
You know what I mean?
What's his name was from Playboy Cardi. I didn't know he was from New York from the way that he rapped. Even Sheck West.
Yeah.
Like So that kind of caught me off guard from what I've been hearing. And then fashion is played like, obviously fashion is influenced by music, right?
Yeah.
And vice versa. And they've become, this thing where they're almost synonymous with each other in every aspect. Like like if you see a runway show today, there's got to be some kind of music.
Yeah.
And you have some background into fashion as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like I've actually, so it's sort of the industry that I work in is fashion or luxury fashion. So, I've worked at places like very corporate and more of a commodity like the Gap. Like I worked for their corporate office.
Okay.
I worked for high-end department stores, like a women's department store called Henry Bendel out in New York.
Yeah, Henry Bendel, yeah.
I've also worked for GILT Group, which some people may be familiar with because it sort of around 2008 or so had this period of like flash sales.
Yeah.
It's one of the pioneers in flash sales, and it was off price, so it was discounted merchandise.
Yeah.
And so I have a background there, and I spent over 8 years at a company called FARFETCH.
Okay.
Which is
Yeah.
essentially, it started off as a startup, and in the end of 2018, it became a publicly traded company.
Yeah.
And essentially, it's targeting sort of this luxury consumer, but it's really for everyone. So it has all of the brand names you could think of, from Gucci, Prada, but with your sort of original point of now the lines are very blurred, right?
Right.
So I think obviously Off-White is one that sort of represents, I think, a good example of a brand that is high fashion, it's streetwear, and beforehand it was sort of like, I would say, fashion used to use hip-hop culture as a way of sort of creating a buzz
Yeah.
or excitement around something because it
Right.
was still risque or it was rebellious, you
Right.
know? And
Yeah, it's hard
see
to
it
not
now,
see a commercial or something
Yeah.
with some kind of hip hop influence in it.
Yeah.
What was your role at FARFETCH?
So at FARFETCH, I was the managing director, which is more of a European term, but essentially a general manager.
Okay.
So just sort of like a jack of all trades. And I was the first employee in FARFETCH North America. And this was back, I joined them in 2010.
Okay.
And essentially, it's a marketplace model.
Yeah.
So the marketplace is essentially, it's an inventory light model, trying to work with sort of mom and pop boutiques across the world,
Yeah.
and essentially, aggregating their product and their inventory on one site, so
Got it.
farfetch.com.
Yeah.
So that's how it started out. It was very international from the beginning, and so
It's based in London, right?
yeah,
The
so
original
headquarters are in London. The founder is Portuguese, so there's also a huge operation in Portugal, probably at least 2,000 employees just there alone.
Wow.
And that's where all of the sort of the technology team sits.
Okay.
So when I joined, I was maybe employee number 20 or so, and by the time we parted ways, or I left the company. So I was there for 8 years, and I left after the IPO. There was maybe about 3,500 employees.
Wow.
So got to sort of see it from evolve from a
its
business
infancy, yeah.
From its infancy,
Yeah.
and through that period, just even the people we would work with from when I first started to who they work with today. It's really interesting because now everything sort of has some type of music or hip hop associated with it, you
Right.
know. So it was amazing to see over the years how sort of fashion and music have, I think they've always been related, but
Yeah.
specifically with hip hop, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but LL Cool J was in Gap videos,
Right.
or Gap commercials and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so where a lot of, you go to any of the sort of, whether it's Complex, High Snobiety, all
Yeah.
of those guys, or it's Paris Fashion Week, there's a hip hop element, whether it's a show where somebody like Offset has a clothing line, such and such has a clothing line.
Right.
Everybody aspires to do, you know, what you've been able to do, Dennis, across several brands. Is like, even my brother has his own product line, and you know, everybody sort of was inspired to sort of like develop their own brand in a way.
Yeah.
And so it's really, I think, exciting, you know, because I don't know where it's going to go, but the lines are definitely blurred to where, you know, like fashion is now very informed and influenced by hip hop, and there's really no going back.
Yeah, I think for me, the common thread between those two is really that the DIY aesthetic. You know, whereas with hip hop, I think you understand that this is kind of that struggle music that we were talking about earlier, and it really came from where the mainstream is not doing what we want, so now we got to do it on our own, and then it's grown to where it's gotten now, which is amazing. And I think for a lot of fashion components, it's the same. So there's, you know, I hate using the word streetwear, but it does define like a certain part of the fashion industry currently. But it's like back in the day, you know, when Dennis was kind of doing his thing a few years ago, what that was in streetwear was because you weren't getting the big fashion houses and the big luxury guys to give you any attention.
Yeah.
So you gotta create it yourself. You know? So I think that common thread is really the DIY kind of attitude.
It's like a lot of the stuff we were into growing up, the subcultures, like you know, hip hop, street fashion, skating, you know, all became, you know, these mainstream industries and became pop culture. Yeah. And now that the kids now can really see, you know, they have a more clear path of something that relates to them because maybe either their parents are into it or it directly speaks to them to want to go out and do something in that field. Yeah.
So taking a step back real quick, Jamie, I know you said, so you were DJing in college, and then your first kind of job that you mentioned was the Gap. So was that more just like, let me get a paycheck type of role?
Yeah, to be honest, I graduated in 2001, and that was sort of when things started to fall apart with the .com world. Yeah. Sort of like what we would call back then the dot bomb. So, you know, I originally, before I graduated, it was one of those situations where I took a job to do strategy consulting for an internet consulting firm called Sapient Corporation. But because sort of the shit hit the fan with the economy, they actually rescinded all of the college offers that they made. Wow. And, you know, back then, to be honest, like I wanted to work, right? I wanted to earn. And so in college, that was just more like, let's get this shit done so I could start earning money and earn a paycheck. And, you know, so I actually had the record back then. So in 2001, I signed this deal, and I was like, holy shit, man, I'm going to make a ton of money. I'm going to buy a fucking Beamer or something like that. Something
you had a record
stupid.
Deal?
What's that?
You had a record deal?
No, nothing like that. But, you know, I signed a job offer that was essentially, you know, back then for a kid coming out of college, you know, somebody paying me $72,000. I was like, and I got a signing bonus. And so I was like, oh shit, man, I'm going to be rolling, you know? And then what ended up happening is like a few months after they made that offer, they took them all back.
Wow. Okay.
And then I was fucked because I didn't have a job, right? And I was like, great. I learned some things where, like, once I secured that job, I was kind of a dick, and I burned bridges with other people who were interested. And then I was like, you know, I was probably too full of myself, and I was like, nah, I'm good. You know what I mean? And so, like, I left a lot of people hanging at that time, or not a lot, but a few people hanging with the job, and then I was like, okay, I learned never burn bridges like that, you know. And so I started at the Gap because it was the only job that I actually got a job offer for, and I had to pay student loans and I had to make rent. So it's sort of like, I don't know if this is going to work, but that's why I started out doing it. And what I really enjoyed about it wasn't so much the fashion as it was the change of pace. Every new season is a new season to get it right or get it wrong. Being able to do something like mark down an item and actually see it I marked that down, and now it's selling like 50% more than it has. I'll, give it its that markdown. So being able to sort of see the economics of doing something and it actually having an impact on others, to me, was just fascinating.
Yeah, that's the one amazing thing about fashion, is that you're always living in the future. Like I mean, I don't know what the calendar is for Gap, but I mean, for us, we always tried to be at least 6 months ahead, if not a full year ahead.
Yeah.
So going back to so now you're doing the Gap. So when did it become, so it sounds like the Gap was, I just had to have something. So when did it become like a spark to you, or was there like a moment or something happened where you were like, you know what, fashion is the way to go? Because now it sounds like after that,
what was your
another role.
aha moment?
Yeah, definitely. So, I started off at the Gap, and specifically with Banana Republic.
Okay.
And so I was doing planning and distribution for, I believe at the time, men's sweaters, and I also did women's accessories. So to me, it really didn't matter the product I was working on, but I liked the pace of it.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I also liked the numbers. So when I say the numbers, it's pretty much storytelling based off of results that are coming out. You do something, and everything is sort of like a test and learn, right? It's like, oh shit, we came out with this, we thought it was going to be hot shit, but nobody's buying it. So now I got to figure a way of marking it down or getting rid of it in some efficient way.
Right.
And then trying to anticipate for the next go around, okay, if we're not going to do that, what should we develop into?
Right.
And so for somebody like Banana Republic or the Gap, it's sort of, when you were sort of stepping out of your comfort zone, it would be adding a different color. So it wasn't that sort
Drastic.
of level. It wasn't drastic. It was but it's the Gap, right?
Yeah.
You can't just flip it on people,
Right,
because you
right.
have your set customer.
Yeah.
And so the number side of it, tied with sort of the pace of it, is really what got me excited. And so once I knew pretty early on that I liked it, the people were great. I think the Gap is a great place to sort of grow up in terms of training, training with your skills, training to be a manager, how they treat people, I thought was really great. And so that was a good sort of foundation. And then once I knew I wanted to do fashion forever, or at least, or apparel, I decided that I'm just going to move to New York because it's the Mecca,
Right.
And all of that happened super quick. I got a call from a headhunter who's representing Ralph Lauren, and I essentially, I think they called me on something like a Monday. I came in, I flew in on a red eye, got there on Friday, interviewed all day, and then got the job offer at maybe 5:30 p.m. that day. I was sitting in Corner Bistro in New York, great burger. And then I accepted the job right there.
Wow.
So it was kind of a crazy thing because it all happened so fast. And the funny thing, I had a long-term relationship at the time. She didn't even know I was going to New York because it all happened so fast. And so sort of one of my first calls was celebrating, probably with my brother. And then it's fuck, I got to make this call. And it didn't go over well.
Yeah.
And, we tried to make it work and whatever. She moved to New York, and it was very short-lived. But all of it happened so fast, and I guess sort of the I don't know if it's a learning, but within there, I was super career focused. There was going to be no stopping my career from at least from what I can control. So relationships weren't as important to me back then, right? So it was sort of that paper chase, and it's sort of that hustle that goes back to the hip hop, that goes back to being poor or not having money, that you just go for it.
And the pace of New York really makes you want to hustle.
It's fucking amazing.
Yeah.
I got goosebumps right now you talking about it. It's so different here.
Yeah. I mean, I was in a similar situation where, I had a previous brand. It was getting to the point where it wasn't doing what we needed to do. And someone, mentioned my name to another company out in New York. And they flew me out, they put me up somewhere, and they really they're really courting me to take the gig. And I wasn't as experienced as a lot of the designers I worked with, but I think there was something that, they saw from me and what I was able to provide that was just like, yeah, we need this kind of blood or this kind of energy here in New York. And plus, New York is so small. Like, a lot of the brands were like recycling designers. There was guys that worked for every other brand, and especially in the urban field, but yeah, that New York pace where, you can tell. That's why, people always, there's always that stereotype of New Yorkers being rude or whatever. It's not that they're rude. I think they're some of the nicest people I ever met. It's just they're so focused and so driven to really want to like get to their gig or grind it out. Yeah. And eventually party.
Yeah. I mean, all the cliches are true, right? If you make it there, you can make it anywhere.
Right.
And it's not, it's everybody's hustling.
Yeah.
So it's like the bartender, the hostess, everybody's got some story.
Guy.
The guy selling the hot dogs.
Yeah, it's like, oh, this isn't my real thing. It's something, I guess that could be the same thing here in LA with entertainment, because we're surrounded by a lot of people that are trying to make it in that market. But there's something said to be having a hustling mentality, but when you go to New York, you just don't talk about it. Like, it's literally going to be like 80 hours. I mean, there's not like, oh, I can work hard, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you're getting your reps in. So it's one of those things where you're just exposed to that for I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but definitely I feel like in the cities that I've been in, I truly grew up in New York because that is just a grind, you know what I mean? Like, and everybody's doing it, so you feel like it's kind of normal. Yeah. And so you have tons of roommates, and you all like are trying to eat like a $2 slice or less than that.
Yeah, 100%. Like, the career-wise, New York made me, and it was some of the hardest jobs I've ever had, and I don't think the success of my brand would have been as big if I hadn't been in New York. If I hadn't worked with a lot of other talented, motivated designers. And just, the electricity that the city gives you is just, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
So what brought you back to California then?
Yeah, so after my time with GILT, which, when I worked at GILT, it was a roller coaster ride, to be honest, because I probably spent 8 hours a day interviewing people, and then I would do my work after that.
Wait, is GILT Group the one that would sell like vacation or like hotel
They do
packages?
that as well. That's that's what do they call that now? I think it has a different name. Jet Setter is something that they own.
Yeah, Jet Setter, that's right.
But GILT Group started out, selling like Tumi luggage for 70%
Got
off.
it. Okay.
You had to be like on an email list.
Yeah, because I remember that. I remember seeing GILT from Jet Setter.
You get the email that was like, okay, today's brand we're going to sell is Lanvin.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we have a 8-hour countdown before it starts. I was all about GILT.
Yeah.
I mean,
that shit would sell out fast.
You had to be.
Man.
You had to be if you're like a broke dude that wanted to stay fly.
Trying to stay fly, yeah.
Especially during that time, right? Because 2008 is when the financial markets took a big hit. So it was a great time. It was a lucky time for GILT to be starting because they were able to get inventory for off price and then unload it for 70% off. Yeah. And so it was a really sort of good time for that type of business. Now it's owned by Hudson Bay, I believe, bought them. Okay. So at one point they were valued at like, $1 billion, or they were a unicorn. They reached unicorn status, and by the time that I think they were acquired by Hudson Bay, it was about $250 million. So definitely it sort of, I was able to see it at its peak, and then also didn't necessarily get to reap the benefits with like equity and why people joined these type of things, because it eventually came down.
What do you think led to their demise or them, falling from that peak?
To be honest, a lot of it, of the success was very hype-driven.
Right.
And it was just sort of a new concept, but it goes back to basics where actually anybody could do it, right?
Yeah.
So there were other people who were doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And there was no barrier to entry. So somebody could come in, they could buy inventory and then just resell it. So the margins and things like that were low, but also the actual supply of the off-price inventory, everybody was trying to get bits and pieces of it.
See, okay.
So it was just sort of like the economics of the business, with the exception of the hype, just weren't really great, you know?
Yeah.
But they did some really cool stuff. The alumni that's coming from there, some of my old coworkers and people that I worked with are, you know, have started all these sort of different businesses. So it was a great network, but it was super intense and actually influenced sort of how I see or places that I want to work. Because it was a very New York sink or swim, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like, yeah. So that was sort of the environment. And I moved back to LA in November of 2010 to join FARFETCH.
Mm-hmm.
So at that time, FARFETCH was just really a concept. They launched in 2008 officially. And I was introduced to the concept through a good friend of mine who you know as well, Keith, Michael from Revolve Clothing. And so we went to high school together. Very successful entrepreneur.
Yeah. Shout out to Michael Mente.
Yeah, for sure.
Cerritos.
Bosco.
Yeah.
Bosco.
Yeah.
And so he was like, hey, I've got this concept, would you be interested in it? And this is sort of what the business model is. And when I was thinking about the business model, I was like, wow, that's really cool, that's really great, it's innovative, it's a startup. And part of what attracted me to it is nobody was doing it. It had potential. The founder was cool. At that point, the US version was a joint venture with Revolve Clothing. And so I was like, you know, there's not a lot of downside with the exception of, you know, there were other job opportunities at the time and this was paying a lot less. But I was like, wow, what a great opportunity. And I chose to jump into that mainly because I liked the position itself as a general manager.
Yeah.
Because I was sort of a one-trick pony, if you will, but doing extremely well in sort of, you know, the merchandise planning, allocation, operation side of things.
Yeah.
But, you know, being able to jump in that, I thought, oh, you know, again, growing up as a kid, if I'm not going to be a rapper, I'm not going to be an athlete, it's like, fuck, I want to be a CEO.
Yeah.
You know, I want to run
Right.
shit.
Right.
And so that was sort of always like my dream. And I was like, okay, this is the pathway. I need to take some steps, at least backward, if you will, or take a pay cut to have a position like this. And then let's sort of see what I'm made of and go from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then that was sort of, you know, they rolled the dice on me, I rolled the dice on them, and it ended up working out really well, you know, and I was able to learn a lot of things that I wasn't necessarily...
especially as a
GM, it's sort of-
you get to learn almost all aspects of the business, and if you ever wanted to go out and start something yourself,
Yeah.
you're like, I know this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you eventually parted ways with FARFETCH, and you took a sabbatical.
Yeah, I did.
How long was that?
So I took, originally I was like, let me take a year off, and then it ended up extending to be about, maybe about 15 months. And it was nice to take time off. I spent some time with the family. I had my own demons about not being around when my daughter was born and helping out my wife early on. And so I was like, you know, we've got our second kid now. The timing's great. He's still young. I can help out, be around the family. I traveled a ton as well. And, you know, I was reading books, just trying to educate myself. And then, you know, thinking about whether or not it was sustainable enough for me from a mental perspective. And I was fortunate enough to do well with the FARFETCH IPO given when I started. So, you know, I approach things in a different way now about thinking, is this something that I really want to do?
Yeah.
And so that's sort of, you know, I wasn't planning to necessarily step out of my semi-retirement, But a job opportunity came by that piqued my interest. And, you know, a headhunter that I used to know about a couple of years ago while I was still at FARFETCH, used to try and recruit me for different roles. She reached out, just a cold call through LinkedIn, and was like, hey, what have you been up to? And I was like, well, I've been taking time off. I was advising some startup companies that were trying to build marketplaces.
Yeah.
And I just sort of like, what do you have going? She, you know, and sort of, she was mentioning, do you happen to like hip hop? I was like, well, it depends on what you define as hip hop, right? Because
What era?
you know, no offense again, like I just don't know the new stuff, so I'm not so familiar with, you know, Tyler, the Creator, or maybe A$AP Rocky, but not all the other guys.
Yeah.
And so I was like, so she's like, well, no, it's specifically focused on classic hip hop. And I was like, oh, perfect. That's,
Like, now you're speaking my
yes.
language. Yeah.
What's this all about? You know, what's the role?
Yeah.
And so it's truly like a startup environment. And I had a bunch of conversations with all of the folks. So it started out like I had to sign an NDA, and I was like, oh, okay, so there's an artist associated with this concept. And I was like, okay, cool, let me sign this NDA. And then I signed the NDA, and I'm cool to talk about it now. And it's sort of like, I looked at it and it said rock the bells. I was like, oh shit, all right.
You started licking your lips.
Exactly. And so I was like, okay, this is gonna be dope. I'd love to, you know, hear more about it. And I was still like on the fence on, you know, do I want to come back? Is this the right concept? Is this the right kind of company? And to be honest, you know, as I was going through the process, I had the opportunity to meet with LL, and he was just everything that you would want like an idol to be. He was a super nice guy.
Yeah.
He was very down to earth, and then he sort of explained to me his mission and his vision about why he's doing this.
Okay.
And he was really great about it, in the sense of, you know, the example that was given to me was like, when you think about classic rock, you know, that is sort of a genre that influenced so much of the music today, but also a lot of the businesses, right? So coming out of classic rock, you know, you have the sort of Margaritavilles, the hard rock cafes, and he's like, hip hop has penetrated popular culture, and there isn't anything that sort of represents our culture that way.
Right.
You know? And he is also about, like, you know, the OGs and sort of paying homage to sort of the founding fathers of the culture. So and not just being an MC, right? So obviously all of the other elements, graffiti, b-boys, DJ.
Yeah.
And so I was like, wow, that's really great. And, you know, when we started to talk about like why he's doing, and he's like, this is for the culture.
Yeah.
This isn't about LL Cool J. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this is sort of paying homage and educating the new kids who's probably their parents are into it.
Right.
And sort of like, hey, you know, this is sort of where it started. It was Crazy Legs or something like that.
Yeah.
And sort of, you know, that's influence when you're watching sort of Red Bull, you know, B-boy
competition.
Competition. So, and I was like, man, that's super dope. And he's an incredibly convincing and inspiring guy, as you can imagine. And I like the mission of what he's trying to do. And so I decided to jump on board and join on the journey. So there's about probably like 5 to 7 people working on it now, and it's still in its infancy. And really what we're trying to do is create a lifestyle brand that sort of reflects the classic hip-hop consumer.
Right.
So it'll have a combination of things like content, commerce, and lifestyle and experiences.
Yeah.
And so
I mean, is it possibly something like hard rock, or something where there's an actual experience where people could go in and, you know, if they bring their kids and you're like, oh yeah, this is when, you know, Run DMC and Aerosmith did, the Adidas thing or whatever.
Yeah, I think eventually it could be that.
Yeah.
Because right now we're just like in the early stages. We had a soft launch just last week. We
Okay.
did a drop of maybe it was about 15 different products to see what would sell.
Yeah.
The intent of the site is to be, and it's rockthebells.com, is essentially to be a lifestyle site. So
Okay.
it'll be a marketplace.
Yeah.
It's not intent. We're not trying to create a brand
Right.
where we are trying to create a brand, but not like an apparel brand where we're
Right.
going to develop like 100 different products.
Yeah.
It's really meant to have it's a marketplace model. I think we'll have a very, very small amount of product that we create ourselves. It's sort of not core to what we do, but it has a lot of things outside of the commerce side of things. So there will be a lot of cool content, articles, videos, interviews, things like that.
Yeah, that's great.
And it's really just to, I'm not sure if it's too niche, but, where we feel is like, let's start there and with the OGs. And essentially from there, we can start to take people down the path of, and this is what the OGs inspired this group, and then this group, and then this is what you see today. And
Right.
so,
And
that's
then it
essentially
probably
what
even
we're
just
trying to
grow
create.
organically and like into something that you might not even,
think that's-
foresee down
yeah.
the road, So,
I think that's always the case. In
Yeah.
my experience with something that's so small, you always at least have a vision of what you think it could be or
Right.
hope it to be.
Right.
But to be honest, it's never that, right?
Yeah.
So it ends up being, it could be a completely different business, or it could be, we're more known for this.
Yeah.
And although we're trying to maybe speak to a huge demographic, it's like the people who truly know us are probably 40 and above. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's and there could be aspects of the experiences that could be super cool for that
Yeah.
consumer, because nobody's really necessarily doing that or caters to that genre in that way.
I agree. And it'd be cool if there was something like that where, you get to experience some of the classic dudes that paved the way in a whole different, more intimate, experience.
Yeah.
So, cool, man.
Yeah.
Are you a Laker fan? though?
Huge Laker fan. Huge.
Yeah, R.I.P. Kobe. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I know you mentioned that you missed some of the time raising your first child because you're so into your work, and I had a similar experience, but that was one of the things that I wasn't a big Kobe Bryant fan. I'll be honest. Me and my boys really took it to where the Clippers came and we're gonna be the Clipper fans. We're gonna be those diehard Clipper fans. But
Yeah.
whenever the Lakers were in the finals or especially early in Kobe's career, it was amazing to see someone like him being so driven. But what made me start to identify with him was after his retirement or him, I kept seeing him as a father. I was seeing him with his daughters and always saying his daughters' names, and when I lived out here in Newport, I'd always see him by Sprinkles getting cupcakes with
Nice.
his daughter, and yeah, so that part of what he was doing really made me a fan of his. And then seeing what he was doing after, business-wise, the creating the Mamba Academy and being so involved in the youth. So,
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a fan, and to be honest, I've always been a Laker fan. And so, I'm wearing Jordans right now, and it hurts me because for probably forever, I was never wearing Jordans. I just started to wear Jordans probably in the past 6 months because I was just like, no. Because MJ was the best, but he wasn't a Laker. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then our version of Jordan is Kobe.
Right.
And so, it's sort of I've always sort of modeled my career after him as well. If Kobe can put in the reps, and if he's putting that kind of work into practice, I can do these hours in New York. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Wow.
Right.
So it's sort of like
Yeah.
approaching. He was like my screensaver. You know, I have all this fucking paraphernalia on my desk. It was all Kobe gear in my not offices, open cubicles. And so it's like it was amazing to have, and I just feel gratitude for being in LA and, you know, him obviously being a Laker throughout his entire career.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, Dennis, it is the happiest we've ever seen him is when he retired.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I sort of like, in a way, and I'm sure a lot of people are inspired by him, like, shit, does he take the same Mamba mentality and hard work ethic to fatherhood?
Yeah.
And he fucking clearly does. And I'm like, I guess I could be fucking stepping up, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like,
Right.
Yeah.
and it's kind of like right in your face too,
Yeah,
like, you know,
yeah.
and it's hard to play at that level all the time, but obviously we've seen somebody who has done it, and I think in a way he's gained probably 10 times more fans by people can relate to that on a human level, right? Maybe they can't, you know, put up 81 points or blah, 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 but hey, everybody wants to be a better like person, community member, friend, mentor. I had no idea he was mentoring all these guys.
I played tennis, and he was mentoring Novak Djokovic, who just won the Australian Open. I'm like, wow, this dude was really like doing a lot after retirement. So, yeah, man, such a great loss for LA and for the whole world, man. I know you gotta get out of here.
I have a last question.
Yeah,
One last question. I'm gonna take you back to your DJing days.
Okay.
All right. You're at a party.
Yeah.
It's jumping.
Let's jump in.
It's the jumping part. It's 12:30, and it's your turn to get on. What record are you playing?
Man. I don't,
Don't tell me
depends.
Al Nafaish. It's time.
You know what came to my mind was like, it depends on who the crowd is, right? Like I was thinking like Soul Sonic Force. Depending if it's on its way down, it would be like whatever, 97, 98 BPM G thing. That's another one. It depends, because especially if you're local. And then, you know, if you've got like the aunties and uncles, titos, titas, and it's like you're gonna play some Jive Bunny fucking, you know, dun, 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 dun. And so, you know, they just like to dance to that shit, and sometimes it would be like whatever, some line dancing shit so people can jump off at a wedding.
It's crazy how the electric slide evolved into what, like, I go to all these, like my grandma just celebrated her 90th, and you know, you see all the aunties and my mom and them doing the line dance. I was like, that's the electric slide.
Yeah.
They just changed it a little bit. They made it more elderly. Yeah, man. Good shit, man.
Word.
Well, hey, man, it was great talking to you. Good seeing you
Likewise.
again.
Good catching
Tell
up.
Ray I said what's up.